In psychological warfare, the weak points are flaws in how people think. If you're trying to hack a person's mind, you need to identify cognitive biases and then exploit them. Now, that absolutely chilling quote comes directly from Christopher Wiley, the whistleblower who blew the lid off Cambridge Analytica. And honestly, it's a profound thought to kick us off, because today, we're exploring the totally invisible machinery that dictates what you see, what you read, and ultimately, what you believe online.
Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're mapping out the escalating invisible threat of data, page views, and algorithms. Look, whether you consider yourself super tech-savvy or you're just sitting there wondering why your newsfeed looks the way it does, this explainer is designed to give you a really structured look at the data-driven economics of the internet. We're going to break down exactly how your personal data gets harvested, how the obsession with page views has literally rewired journalism, and how these massive advertising algorithms running constantly in the background are actively funding fake news and perpetuating systemic bias. To really wrap our heads around this, we actually need to start with a seemingly innocent meeting. Picture this. It's August 2016. Author and researcher Sander van der Linden was just starting a new gig at Cambridge University. He meets up at a historic local pub with a friendly, super energetic colleague named Alex Kogan. Kogan was this ambitious startup type who'd recently left academia. Over a couple of pints, Kogan casually mentions he's pivoting into big data. Well, when van der Linden brought up his own work surveying public opinion on climate change, Kogan literally scoffed at him. He told van der Linden he could hand him millions of data points predicting people's opinions straight from Facebook just based on what they liked and posted. For van der Linden, alarm bells immediately went off. Just who was going to use that data? And honestly, more importantly, how on earth did Kogan get his hands on so much of it? Well, here's how. Kogan got it by building a Facebook app called This Is Your Digital Life. It was marketed as one of those fun little personality quizzes we've all seen. But beneath the surface, it was mapping users against what psychologists call the ocean model. These are the big 5 personality traits: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. By paying a couple of 100,000 people to take this quiz, Kogan was able to perfectly match their psychological profiles directly to their online activity. And here's the real kicker. By taking the quiz, users consented to having not just their own public data scraped, but the data of their entire friend network too.
So the crucial point is, that number exploded to 87 million. Because of that friend network scraping feature, a relatively small group of initial participants yielded data on up to 87 million individuals worldwide. That is enough people to fill thousands of stadiums. This massive trove of highly predictive psychological data was then turned around and sold to Cambridge Analytica, who used it to micro-target voters online with political ads tailored precisely to their specific cognitive biases. It was basically military-style psychological operations completely adapted for your everyday social media feed.
All right, moving on to Section 1, the perils of page views and the ecosystem of clicks. You see, this kind of data exploitation doesn't just happen in a vacuum. It entirely relies on a media ecosystem where your attention is literally the currency. Back in the early days of blogging, writers were just paid per post, or they had a flat salary. Simple, right? But then a huge paradigm shift happened. Media companies started paying bloggers a base salary that was augmented by a bonus tied directly to the number of page views their articles generated. Some places even installed massive live digital scoreboards in their offices, tracking clicks in real time. This created a totally twisted set of incentives. A meticulously researched, beautifully fact-checked article suddenly provided no more financial value than a piece of rushed, vapid tabloid trash. Actually, scratch that. The controversial clickbait usually generated way more clicks, meaning more ad revenue. Quality didn't matter anymore. Traffic became the whole shebang. And this total obsession with page views fundamentally altered how news travels on the internet. Historically, we had what's called downward vertical propagation. That's when a major outlet, like, say, the Washington Post, breaks a story, and smaller blogs copy it just to retain their own readers. It's redundant, sure, but generally harmless. But the page view economy fueled something incredibly dangerous: upward vertical propagation. Think about the last time you saw some bizarre, hyper-local stories suddenly blow up on national news. This is where small, obscure blogs, who are desperate for traffic and operating with zero editorial standards, just invent highly sensational fake stories. Mid-level blogs, starving for content to fill their daily quotas, aggregate those stories without fact-checking a single thing. And eventually, the sheer virality of the fake story becomes the news itself, and massive national networks end up covering a complete fabrication. And make no mistake, opportunists quickly figured out how to weaponize this upward flow for pure profit. Take Paris Wade and Ben Goldman. They were literally unemployed restaurant workers who started a site called Liberty Writers News, churning out these aggressive, hyper-partisan headlines. Astonishingly, at their peak, they were raking in $40,000 a month in ad revenue. No joke. Or look at Christopher Blair, a liberal blogger who created a fake right-wing site as satire, only to find out that the more extreme and fake his stories were, the more millions of people believed and shared them. Then there's Justin Kohler. He's a registered Democrat who created an entirely fabricated local newspaper called the Denver Guardian. He completely invented an FBI murder-suicide story from thin air, and it generated 1.5 million views in just 10 days. For these guys, fake news isn't some deep ideology, it is a highly, highly lucrative business model. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how we transition into Section 2, funding fake news and the invisible enablers. So, you're probably wondering, how exactly are these peddlers getting paid $40,000 a month? I mean, they certainly aren't selling subscriptions, right? Well, they are being funded by the digital ad industry, predominantly led by Google. Now, when most of us think of Google, we just think of a search engine. But fundamentally, Google is the world's largest advertising company. 4 out of every $5 Google earns comes straight from ads. And they don't just put ads on their own search pages. They operate the Google Display Network. This is a massive automated algorithmic system where Google acts as a virtual middleman, placing ads from major brands onto third-party websites all across the internet. And because this automated system optimizes for sheer traffic rather than actual truth, it funnels incredible amounts of money straight to disinformation sites. According to a 2019 report by the Global Disinformation Index, the fake news industry pulled in nearly $250 million in online ad revenue that year, and Google was responsible for an estimated 87 million of that total. That means Google powered nearly 40% of the revenue for the entire fake news industry. Major brands, we're talking insurance companies, charities, hospitals, were inadvertently having their ads and their hard-earned money algorithmically placed on sites pushing wild election conspiracies and medical hoaxes. Which naturally leads us right into Section 3, algorithmic bias and racism. You see, the really deep problem with these ad distribution algorithms isn't just that they fund fake news. It's that they're built on machine learning models that just absorb our inherently flawed human data. Take Google's Keyword Planner, a tool that suggests search terms for advertisers. An investigation by the markup found that the system automatically generated pornographic keyword suggestions for phrases like Black girls, Latina girls, and Asian girls. Conversely, it returned 0 of those suggestions for white girls. In a totally separate instance on YouTube, Google was found to be blocking the phrase Black Lives Matter for ad targeting, effectively preventing creators from monetizing that content while fully allowing ad targeting for the phrase White Lives Matter. The algorithm simply absorbed statistical associations from massive amounts of historical user search data and essentially turned societal bias into an automated advertising standard. Let's move to and see how this builds over on Facebook, where algorithmic targeting created massive legal fallout. Back in October 2016, journalists discovered Facebook's ad system explicitly allowed advertisers to exclude users by race. Now, if you're advertising housing or jobs, that is massively illegal under the Fair Housing Act. Over a year later, in November 2017, investigators found those exclusions were still there. They were just renamed to multicultural affinity. It took years of intense pressure until March 2019, when the ACLU finally announced a landmark civil rights settlement forcing Facebook to overhaul its ad platform, which was followed mere days later by federal charges from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. But here is where it gets truly mind-boggling. Even if you completely remove the manual option for an advertiser to target or exclude a specific demographic, the algorithm itself still optimizes for engagement. A study by Northeastern University proved this by buying identical ads for different jobs and just letting the algorithm deliver them. The differences are stark. Facebook's algorithm delivered ads for doctor and AI industry jobs disproportionately to white males. Meanwhile, ads for janitor jobs were shown to a significantly less white audience, and preschool jobs were shown to an overwhelmingly female audience. The algorithm learned from historical click data who was quote-unquote most likely to engage, and in doing so, it actively perpetuated historical biases, steering high-paying jobs away from minorities and women entirely on autopilot. Okay, let's pull back the lens for our final section, Section 4, Repeating History and the Digital Yellow Press. When you look at all of this, the clickbait, the fake news, the algorithmic bias, it really feels like we're in some unprecedented modern crisis, doesn't it? But if we zoom out, we realize we have absolutely been here before. Back in the late 19th century, we suffered through the era of yellow journalism. Newspapers were sold on an individual, daily basis on street corners.
To win those daily street sales, publishers relied on the wildest, most sensational, and often completely fabricated headlines. Fake news literally helped launch the Spanish-American War. And this brilliantly illustrates how today's digital yellow press is the exact same dynamic, just on digital steroids. Instead of newsboys shouting on a street corner, we have algorithmic news aggregators shouting on your feed, trying to bait you into a click just to generate fractions of a penny in ad revenue.
So, how in the world did we fix yellow journalism back then? The answer was actually the subscription model. At the turn of the 20th century, papers like the New York Times shifted to print subscriptions. Think about it. If a reader felt misled by a fake headline, they would just cancel their subscription. The financial incentive instantly shifted from getting a quick, cheap sale to maintaining long-term trust. We are seeing this same vital correction happening right now today, with outlets like the Wall Street Journal and others successfully instituting digital paywalls in the 21st century to finally escape this toxic page view economy.
So, what does this all mean for us? The structures curating your daily feed are largely invisible, driven by an economic model that values your engagement way more than your enlightenment. Can the broader internet escape this era and adopt models that actually reward truth and quality? Or will our digital reality forever be shaped by algorithms just optimizing for a single click? It's definitely something to think critically about the next time you scroll, click, or share. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Stay curious, keep questioning what you read, and I'll catch you next time.